Good morning. I have quite a few taxa to show in the genus Psilocybe, which is my original forte and center of my studies at the Evergreen State College. I went to the Evergreen State College in 1976, directly after spending time as a hippie logger setting chokers in the mountains. And then I had a hang gliding accident some of you know about that nearly killed me, and I decided it was time for me to take a different direction in life because I was definitely on a death mission, it seemed. And mushrooms were a particular interest to me, and so I went to the Evergreen State College, and because of a series of unique circumstances and coincidences, I was kind of at the right place at the right time and ended up being tutored by some of the fathers of mycology in North America, Dr. Alexander Smith as well as Dr. Daniel Stuntz. And then I built a strong relationship with Dr. Gaston Guzman from Veracruz, Mexico, who's the foremost world authority on the genus Psilocybe. And in 1978 or 1977, around that period of time, he came to the United States, and we spent several weeks together traveling up and down the coast of the Northwest and collecting specimens for his monograph. And his monograph on the genus Psilocybe still stands as the best work ever published on the subject. And I was honored to be one of his most major contributors to that monograph. All my work on these mushrooms was covered by a Drug Enforcement Administration license that is still in effect through the Evergreen State College. Now I'm very, very careful because of my business, and people have to understand that I'm self-censored. Nobody has ever come to me saying, Paul, you shouldn't talk about this. I've never had any interference with the government. I have been bribed, or people have attempted to bribe me probably dozens of times with huge amounts of money, and it doesn't matter. I don't care how much money people offer me. I will not sell cultures. I will not give cultures away, and I won't be involved with anybody. And it's kind of, it's kind of fun. People offer me money, and this is not enough, more. No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much money you offer me. I will not get involved in other people's cultivation efforts of psilocybin mushrooms. So I've been, in the same respect, I've been extremely good at disservicing my own profit wheel. There's about 3 ways I could have made millions of dollars in this mushroom scene. One is with the chanterelle and the wild mushroom harvest in Washington State. I live in Mason County, the gold belt of the chanterelle harvest. And I could have involved myself in that years ago, but I had moral problems with the issues of over-harvesting, and I just didn't feel it was sustainable. And many of us people hunting wild mushrooms, when you come into a forest in the aftermath of commercial harvesters, it's extremely depressing because everything's been wiped clear. The kombucha craze that has swept this country now 4 times this century. Most of you heard about kombucha 2 years ago. We were getting 10 to 20 phone calls a day for it. And I've been growing it for over 15 years and could have easily profited from that. The third way I could have made a lot of money is selling spore prints of psilocybe mushrooms, which are legal in this country. California, there is a state law against it, but the federal statutes specifically mention any substance containing salts or isomers of psilocybin or psilocin are prohibited. When it comes to marijuana, they mention the genus cannabis, and they mention cannabinols. When it comes to peyote, they mention peyote and mescaline. The federal statutes come to mushrooms, they're not mentioned at all. So there is kind of like a hole in the law, and there's many companies selling spore prints legally, and they continue to do so. I chose not to, and I have to pay my phone bills, and I have to pay all my other utility bills, etc. So sometimes I kick myself in the pants, but not for very long, because I realized the path that I chose was I think, ethically the correct one. So I am an expert on the genus Psilocybe. I know quite a bit about it, and my specialty has been taxonomy in the genus Psilocybe. The cultivation work that I did was specifically to be able to grow up material for my scanning electron microscopy and the other work that we did at the Evergreen State College. And to date now, I have 4 species that I've published in the scientific literature in Latin, in reputable mycological journals. And I have 2 or 3 more taxa that are kind of in the wings. Now, at the same time, I don't go out mushroom hunting every day, and I don't understand how these species come to me. I really believe that there is some sort of conscious response or solicitation. I tend to find these things, and I don't quite understand how I find them. And they just kind of come to me. Well, 3 weeks ago, Dusty and I were hiking up in the Olympics and was on a 5-day high alpine excursion. And we were walking up the trail, and she found a group of mushrooms. And I said, oh, wow, interesting. It looks like Gallerinas, you know, from looking down. And in the genus Gallerina, there are many deadly poison species. And which is just poetic humor that I think that these mushrooms have, because when I leaned down and picked the mushrooms, they had a purple-brown spore print. And they weren't Gallerinas, they were Psilocybes. And the Solduck River Basin, which goes into ancient old growth, has a unique mushroom flora there. And this collection that we found, I'm 90% convinced is a new species. And it's just, these things just happen to me, and I don't really claim credit for it. And I want to emphasize that as much as I can, is that I'm a vehicle for communication, but I don't own these ideas. These ideas are much greater than any one person. So at the same time, I'm going to give you a lot of information on the genus Psilocybe and taxonomy and how to accurately identify these mushrooms, at least to exclude poisonous species. But beyond that, I will not answer any questions on cultivation, you know, and please don't be offended. If you're smart enough, you can just look at cultivation of Stropharia rugosa annulata or other wood decomposing species that share similar temperature climes and preferences for habitat, and you can draw your own conclusions. But if you deal with fungi perfecti, and I apologize to anybody here who's called up fungi perfecti and says, listen, I want to get spore prints of Psilocybe cubensis, we say we don't sell them. And I said, I want to order a pressure cooker. We said, I'm sorry, we will not sell to you. So that's the end of our conversation. All of our employees signed contracts. 2 employees have been fired for answering questions. Not because anybody told me to do this. This is my own, you know, personal direction of my employees, because I want to stay in this industry for life. And I feel that by not directly encouraging the cultivation of psilocybin mushrooms, I can help everybody interested in that subject as well. So, you know, 98% of our business truly is supplying the gourmet and medicinal mushroom trade. Anybody who spent any time at our facility can see what we're really doing there. And the projects that we have going on are extremely exciting. I think they're revolutionary. They have potential for curing this planet of many ills and helping human health. And that is the bigger picture. And if psilocybes were my vehicle or my doorway into the mushroom scene, then I'm extremely grateful and thankful to them for that. So just please understand my position, because it's one that I have to very carefully walk and watch. No one's asked for our mailing list, and if they did ask for our mailing list, they get a whole bunch of people from Iowa and Nebraska, you know, who are retirees who are buying oyster and shiitake kits, because that is our mailing list, you know. So with that caveat, I want to have the lights off, and then we can rock and roll here. I have, where's my pointer? This is a photograph from Peter First. The photographs I'm going to show today, most of the photographs I've been showing for the past 2 talks are most all of them have been mine. This slideshow is a collection of photographs, and I want to give acknowledgement to Peter First, to Gary Linkoff, to Georgios Samarini. There's several from Dr. Mosier in Europe, and Scott Redhead and a few other individuals, Dr. Ola as well. And I'm not going to specifically individualize every photograph to the photographer, but they're credited in my most recent book, Psilocybin Mushrooms of the World. This is from southern Mexico, about 500 years AD, and I think it illustrates what we all share in common. This is probably one of the many of the ancient mushroom conferences, you know, and the celebration of mushrooms. And I think all of us feel the same as these Mesoamericans did, you know, nearly 500 years ago. So it is through art that we know much about the history of the use of mushrooms. And all of you who are artists out there who are poor and struggling, I hope you bear in mind is that, you know, civilizations have been studied through the art and the artifacts that have remained and been preserved through time. So the great thing about these conferences also, and one of the sorry things I think about the Grateful Dead disbanding, is that there's a whole subculture of artists who do all sorts of mushroom motifs and mushroom work that's just incredibly beautiful. And these people spend a lot of time, making these artworks. So I hope all of you who are artists, continue making mushroom motifs, etc., and art with mushroom themes, because I think it will survive through time. And we'll, a century from now, anthropologists will look back at this period and say, well, what is the art of its time? In that regard, Christian Retsch, who was here last year, has produced an excellent book, which is about, I think, 1,000 pages long. Just came out. It's in German, and it's the Encyclopedia of Psychedelic Plants. And in what Christian does, which I love about his work, is that he goes back 1,000, 2,000 years, shows the entire timeline and the use of mushrooms throughout many cultures throughout the world, and then he takes it through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the early 90s. And so he treats it as a continuum. He is a true, ethnomycologist in that respect, but he doesn't stop the timeline, at R. Gordon Wasson. He continues it all the way to the present. So I highly recommend his book. It is in German. It just came out. He's got an excellent section on mushrooms. Okay, in northern Algeria, about 5 to 6,000 years ago, there's some reports that we're putting these drawings now back 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. In northern Algeria, at the Tassili Enajar Plateau, which literally translates as a plateau of running rivers, there was found a huge complex of caves, which is the largest repository, they believe, of cave art in the world. I think there's 60,000 images have been recorded so far. Northern Algeria now, of course, has been encroached by the Sahara Desert, but several thousand years ago, 12,000 years ago, the end of the Ice Age, and as the glaciers receded, of course, there was lots of rivers, and deciduous woodlands and conifer woodlands flourished. And so this area was once resplendent with water. In 1947, a Japanese and French anthropologist photographer team named Lotte, and I think Yamaguchi, traveled to northern Algeria, and they were documenting and photographing all of these cave art pictographs. And they were running out of water, and they sent one of their emissaries down in search for water, and he traveled through a complex labyrinthine cave system, and he went deep into the recesses of this cave network. And there's this great report describing how he lifted his lantern up, and after he entered this large, unique circular cavern, which looked like a shamanic den, and as he lifted his lantern, he almost dropped it, because this image hovered overhead. Now, at that time, and until recently, it is bizarre to imagine that anthropologists could not figure out what this image was. Obviously, the artist is very excited about mushrooms. I mean, really excited about mushrooms. And the fact that it's associated closely with a bee face, many of you well know, even today, many people preserve magic mushrooms in honey. The honey then, because it has high in sugar and prevents bacteria from growing, preserves the mushrooms for a long time, and it's a traditional way of keeping these specimens in good shape. I believe that the fermentation then, which would occur on some level, of the honey would create a psychoactive mead, a psychoactive beer. And Christian Retsch also has done an excellent study on psychoactive beers of early Europe, and he agrees with me that likely the magic mushrooms are also added to the early meads, etc. So I think this naturally fits. If you were preserving these mushrooms in honey, you would be making a psychoactive beer with that groups of the honey that would ferment. So I think we all are part of a continuum through history, and I think our knowledge and appreciation of mushrooms is hopefully cumulative, oftentimes not, but we're all part of a bigger picture. And our love and fascination for mushrooms, we're all carrying the torch now, and we'll pass it down from one generation to another generation. I do own a Mesoamerican mushroom stone that Peter first helped me get, that's about 500 years BC. And I feel truly I'm just a custodian of this artifact. And there must have been 20 or 30 other individuals who were custodians as well. So it's just being passed through history. And I believe the torch needs to be passed to our children and then passed further on. Okay, the mushroom likely that they were using in northern Algeria is this one. Gary Linkoff found this on a pine cone, Pinus pinaster, I believe, and it's Psilocybin maryi. And this is a very exciting find. And Gary's and Manny Salzman and Joanne's travels around the world have been exceptionally beneficial to me, because they've been able to go to regions and take photographs of things that I have not been able to collect. So this one still was recently collected in Algeria, which is probably a remnant of a much larger population of psilocybes that were resident at the time that there were deciduous woodlands and there was lots of running rivers. But as the desert environment expanded, of course these species became a lot less frequent in their occurrence. And then the ritual use of them probably died out because of lack of availability. Mesoamerican mushroom stones, there's several excellent books on them. There's one that's funded by the Japanese Tobacco Institute, working with a nun in Guatemala, who I would love to see come to this conference sometime. Her name is Yvonne Summercamp, and she is now been elevated as a mother of a convent. And she has spent a lot of her time studying the use of magic mushrooms, and with particular emphasis on mushroom stones in Mesoamerica. They produced an excellent book on the etymology of mushroom stones and the historical trend of their development. And the square-based ones, there are square-based ones, triangular ones, and circular ones. And the square-based ones are the oldest ones. The triangular ones tend to be circa around 100 BC to 300 AD. And then the first of the square ones, then the tripod, and then the circular ones were 500 years AD and to 1,000 years AD. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but this is a photograph that George Osgood helped me connect with a National Geographic photographer in the early 1970s, went down for a graduate student's award of his PhD, and he was doing work on mushroom stones. So they collected mushroom stones from all over Central America, and they grouped them together. And this is another symbolism of another mushroom conference, in a sense, sharing the interest in mushrooms. Okay, is the understanding, well, the popular knowledge, even the academic knowledge of the use of these mushrooms in Mesoamerica largely was not known until the work of R. Gordon Wasson and Blas Pablo Rico, who preceded him, who was a Mexican anthropologist who first published some work in some of the English language literature. And then R. Gordon Wasson took a lot of his work. And then in 1957, May 13th, I've gotten about 50 copies of these, and I like to give them to my friends. You can buy them. It's known as the drug issue, if you go to the magazine search companies. And it has a complete article here on the discovery of magic mushrooms. And the editors of Life magazine, R. Gordon Wasson, demanded and got absolutely no censorship, no editing of his work whatsoever in this, but he gave up the title. They could choose their own title. So the editors of Life magazine chose, I think it says here, Seeking the Magic Mushroom. And this coined the phrase magic mushrooms, so to speak, and became extremely popular, mostly through the academic circles of Harvard, Yale, Stanford, University of California, Berkeley, and those institutes of higher learning were more aware of this than other people because they were involved in the academic literature until this was published. And then this arrived, I think 20 million copies showed up, on the doorsteps and the households of Americans. And wow, this had a big effect and created a domino interest in the magic mushrooms. And this is the famous Maria Sabina, who's a shaman. There are other people, Jonathan Ott in particular, who can speak with much greater depth than I on this subject. But in here, this is R. Gordon Wasson, Roger M., who's a French mycologist, and in here they published, and it's very, very super excellent watercolors that are taxonomically correct. Roger M. was an artist as well as a very good mycologist. And these are this is a field guide that, again, showed up in 20 million American households, showing you how to identify magic mushrooms in Mexico. Well, and there's extraordinary reports in here of the visions, of palaces and, all sorts of geometrical fractals and all those great descriptions that we all love to read and experience. So I got a lot of people excited, especially people involved in the Beat generation, poets, the Jack Kerouac age, a lot of those individuals got real excited about this information, including Ken Kesey, etc. And so they used this, and a lot of them went down to Mexico in search of the magic mushroom. They disguised the name of the village where Maria Sabina was actually practicing in order to protect her, but many people were able to seek her out and find her, and she was inundated. The mushroom that was most highly revered in southern Mexico was this one, which is very curious because this is a very petite, small species. It's known as Psilocybin mexicana. It is packed full of psilocybin, very low in psilocin. You can jump on this mushroom. It does not bruise bluish whatsoever. The bruising bluish reaction is a classic reaction that typically indicates with dark spored purple-brown mushrooms that the mushroom is psychoactive. So I find it always very curious that of all the other species they had abundantly around them, most of which were much larger than this and much more conspicuous, this inconspicuous grassland species was the preferred mushroom given the name of the village where Maria Sabina was actually practicing in order to protect her, but many people were able to seek her out and find her, and she was inundated. The mushroom that was most highly revered in southern Mexico was this one, which is very curious because this is a very petite, small species. It's known as Psilocybin mexicana. It is packed full of psilocybin, very low in psilocin. You can jump on this mushroom. It does not bruise bluish whatsoever. The bruising bluish reaction is a classic reaction that typically indicates with dark spored purple-brown mushrooms that the mushroom is psychoactive. So I find it always very curious that of all the other species they had abundantly around them, most of which were much larger than this and much more conspicuous, this inconspicuous grassland species was the preferred mushroom given the epithet Teananacato, which means God's flesh. So, and this is what it looks like. These are fairly large specimens, and they tend to dry out and become hygrophilous. I was able to cultivate it. It was a beautiful mushroom to cultivate, and it's like God touched the center of every mushroom. It was really a beautiful mushroom to grow, but also very petite. And this mushroom was reserved for the most sacred of rituals. And touristas and who come down from America and elsewhere in Europe, they were typically given Psilocybe cubensis or sometimes Psilocybe celulescens. And that Psilocybe cubensis was associated with the Spaniards and the invasion when they brought cattle into Mesoamerica. And so it is believed that Psilocybe cubensis did not occur until the conquistadors came over. And then with them they brought spore mass, probably from an island off of Spain that was a major trading port for them. So it may have come from India or Vietnam or the Southeast Asian group, and then came over to Mesoamerica from there. Gary showed this photograph of mine, a Psilocybe tamponensis. It's really relative to Psilocybe mexicana. Both of these species form sclerotia. Stephen Pollack and Gary Linkoff discovered one specimen. The one specimen that was discovered was cultured by Stephen Pollack, and then other specimens, voucher specimens, were created, and the species was published by Stephen Pollack and Dr. Gaston Guzman. Since then, it has kind of remained in the background until 2 years ago, and now it's been located in Louisiana and Mississippi along the Mississippi River. So another example of a riparian species. These riparian habitats seem to be fantastic at producing these psilocybin mushrooms. Now, as you'll see in the course of this talk, there is a very peculiar association with magic mushrooms following humans. And humans have the dubious distinction of creating probably the greatest debris trails of any organism on this planet. We are great destructors of the environment. And in destroying the environment, we create wood chips, debris, we chop wood, we have fire pits, etc. We make trails, and we have all the spore mass hitchhiking with us. And there is a flow of psilocybin active species of mushrooms closely associated with human habits. And we think that naturally a lot of these species evolved in riparian environments where there is repetitive flooding, tremendous devastation to the ecosystem, and these saprophytic mushrooms, spring into the limelight. So I spoke of this briefly. The spores here in the genus Psilocybe typically are purple-brown, and heavy spore prints like this approach black. And this is spores of Psilocybe cubensis being collected in Mexico on typing paper. And then in the 1970s, a series of books came out, all within a few years, and I'll just briefly describe them. Gary Linkoff co-authored this book. My laser pointer's not working. It's the second one down on the left. Toxic and hallucinogenic mushroom poisonings, which was an excellent, still is to this day, a super excellent book. And really, it was Gary's, I think, his first publication effort, and he did a super job on it. Then on the far upper left is Bob Harris's Growing Wild Mushrooms. Then on the far right is Teanana Cattle, which is basically different articles by different individuals attending the second psychoactive mushroom conference in Port Townsend, Washington. Stephen Pollack's books on the middle right there, Magic Mushroom Cultivation. My first books on the lower right, Psilocybe Mushrooms and Allies. Jonathan Ott's book, Hallucinating Plants of North America. And then really curious is this one here, The Golden Guide to Hallucinating Plants, what every elementary kid should be acquainted with, you know? And I still don't know the full story of how this book got into publication, but it's not in publication anymore. But when it came out, and Richard Evans Schultes participated in the publication of this book, and they came out with a golden guide of this. Now there is a Spanish edition that Jonathan Ott still has access to. For those of you who don't have this book, and many of us collect, you know, mushroom books. But this is symptomatic of what happened at the time in the middle to late 1970s. Suddenly there was an awareness that these mushrooms not only grew in Mexico, and they grew in North America. But because they're little brown mushrooms, and because of their habitats, they were not frequently seen by traditional mycologists, who are mostly identifying mushrooms for pot hunters, people collecting big mushrooms coming in for the table, you know, they want to eat. So when suddenly all these long hairs started bringing in these little tiny mushrooms and wondering if they were poisonous or psychoactive, it was out of their ken of knowledge of these mycologists. They had not seen these species before, they're not familiar with them, because many species in the Northwest do not grow in truly natural environments. They're associated with beauty bark, they grow around government office buildings, churches, law enforcement facilities, courthouses. Oh, it is very, very ironic that these administration buildings of government tend to be one of the best places to find psychoactive mushrooms. So, for instance, in Thurston County, Washington State, the Thurston County Courthouse has been the largest patch of Psilocybe cyanescens I've ever seen in my life. And it's right beside the jail. If anybody wants to go to the Thurston County Courthouse, you can just rummage right through the beauty bark there and in October, and there's a prolific fruitings. Now, this is ironic, and I would speculate that maybe it's because the law enforcement officials started busting people collecting, you know, these wild psilocybin mushrooms, and they foolishly concentrate them into one location because they have to go to the courthouse to be, you know, prosecuted or processed. And in the course of that, concentrating all the spore mass into a courthouse facility, well, guess what? You know, all these mushrooms start growing around the courthouse. So now I know several people who, unfortunately, I know 2 or 3 people who, you know, end up going to jail. And one of my friends who, you know, for his own stupid reasons, ended up getting in trouble. But he was very, very popular at a state penitentiary because he was the only one who knew how to identify psilocybes. And in the penitentiary environment, there was huge flushes of cyanescens and baeocystis. So he was like, he went to prison and he became a god, right? And he was really looking at a terrible stay in prison, but because of his knowledge and whatnot, I mean, people treated them superbly well. So this is Dr. Gaston Guzman. This is Gary from Mexico. Gary Menser, then here. I don't remember this individual's name. There's Stephen Pollack, and this friendly-looking character here is me. And then Dale Leslie on the far right. This is the contingent that spent 2 weeks together, traveling up and down the north coast of North America. And literally, everywhere we were stopping, we were finding psilocybe mushrooms. It was just a ridiculous series of coincidences that was at first unnerving, but then became the norm. It became normal. At one point, Dale Leslie on the far right was supposed to meet us at the University of Washington at the botany department and failed to show up. We had to drive to Vancouver, Washington. We had to drive to Vancouver, British Columbia. We jumped on Interstate 5. We were 60, 70 miles north of Seattle, and we're wondering, where's Dale Leslie? Where's Dale Leslie? And I look over to my right, and there's Dale Leslie driving in a little Volkswagen Bug, you know, 70 miles an hour. trying to catch up to us, and we were side by side. Coincidences like that happen continuously, and it really pushes the envelope here of believability. But many of you who have been involved with these psilocybin mushrooms, you know that these coincidences are the norm, not the exception. And you need something else is operating here that is, that is not logical in the linear sense. Okay, a few other books that came out. Leonard Enos's book, which is horrible. Psilocybin, this book was horrible. This book's horrible. All these books were horrible, except for Gary Menser's book. And Gary Menser died about 6 years ago. And he was kind of he and I were kind of taxonomic competitors, so to speak, producing books in opposition to each other. But he did a really good job. And I'm sorry that he's passed away. And then there's my 4 books that I've produced. And this first book here on the left is out of print. And then The Mushroom Cultivator, Growing Gourmet, and then the most recent one that I produced, I actually wrote the book and it was in a filing cabinet for 10 years. I took the book almost to completion and then I put it away. Now, those of you who are artists or writers, like Andy and other individuals here, sometimes you just give up on a project. And I put it away, and then David Aurora knew that I had this manuscript. And Phil Wood of 10 Speed Press was eager to get another book on his, as part of his titles. And so David came to me and says, Paul, listen, whatever happened to that book you were writing? And I go, well, it's right over there. So I pulled the book out and then I re-updated it. And that book came out, I guess, a year and a half ago, which has had tremendously positive reviews, despite several interesting chapters that I put in the book, like good tips for great trips, which I thought was accidentally sink me academically, but as it turned out not to. And I've had the Harvard Review wrote a really positive review on this field guide, and it's widely used by universities around the world because the taxonomy is good. I'm happy to say that the taxonomy is real solid. So psilocybes grow in a wide variety of environments: the grassland environments, the riparian environments, and the woodland environments are the 3 classic habitats. However, because of the recent colonization of North America, a lot of these habitats cross over. So habitat-specific field guides might work in Ireland, but they don't work really well in North America because even here in Telluride, you have lawns on top of wood chips. So you end up getting with wood-decomposing mushrooms growing up through the lawns. So field guides that are designed primarily by habitat don't always delineate species properly. This is Psilocybe semilanciata, otherwise known as the Liberty Cap. It grows in Washington, Oregon, British Columbia. There's been 2 reports from upstate New York. It grows throughout temperate regions of Europe, from France and England to Italy. It grows in southern Chile, which is a very interesting environment. It's one of the rainforest environments. So this is a species that is widely dispersed around the world, typically associated with grasslands, but the fruitings are enhanced if there are sheep or cows present. The extra nitrogen seems to increase the fruitings. And this shows you how many mushrooms that you can find. Psilocybe semilanciata is packed full of psilocybin, very low in psilocin. Those species which are high in psilocin tend to bruise bluish. Those which are high in psilocybin and low in psilocin do not tend to bruise bluish. Psilocin is dephosphorylated psilocybin, and psilocin tends to be very unstable. Psilocybin is quite stable. So you'll see more of that. Psilocybe, this is a super photograph by Steve Morgan of Psilocybe semilanciata. It tends to have a dark chestnut brown cap. These mushrooms are prolific in the Northwest. And I went to Christ Church in Oxford, England, and if we can get this in focus here, thank you, George. This, literally over here on the right, there's a wall there, and that's the wall where Humpty Dumpty fell off of, supposedly. And Lewis Carroll was soliloquying the courtship of the headmaster's daughter. And he began to write, Alice in Wonderland here. And it was very funny because right the field adjacent, I found Liberty Caps growing, at Christ Church. And I think a lot of these artists and writers, at this time in Europe were experimenting, or knew people who were experimenting with mushrooms. And I think it really embellished their writings. Psilocybe semilanciata tends to be cuspidate, has an acute papilla or an umbo at the top of a little sharp nipple at the very top of the cap, and then it quickly decomposes. As it dries, it loses its color, becomes straw color. This is a taxonomically important feature. It's called, it becomes hygrophonous. The cap is hygrophonous, dark when it's wet, straw colored when it dries. And this is my brother John here, who you can barely see. He's the one who first got me into mushrooms. He went to Yale, and a lot of his Yale buddies went down to Mexico and South America, and he came back with extraordinary stories. And I was only 14, 15 years of age, but my ears were really highly tuned to what he was telling me. And he came back, and he was, being in New England and whatnot, he collected a lot of amanitas as well. So my brother John is really my mentor. And we spent a lot of times in the woods, and you might say on the ground together. So he's a good tripping buddy of mine. And this is a real good example of Psilocybin lanceta, well photographed by Jim Jacobs, and it shows the opaqueness of the cap. Now, one of the species that I was able to discover and name was this one, Psilocybin lentiformans variety Americana, and this one is also present in Holland, in the Netherlands, and in Scandinavian countries. And it is a grassland species, and it tends to expand out. And you can read more about the taxonomy of these species, and since time is so limited, I really need to move on as quickly as I can. This is a very good friend of mine. His name, I won't give his last name, his first name is Eric. I know a few people here know him. And Eric is one of the people who's probably spent more times in the field collecting psilocybes than anybody else on this planet. And he told me about this species that was growing. And there's a lot of confusion about a species called Psilocybe collosa and then Psilocybe strictipes. I won't go into the taxonomy of that, but this is an extraordinary environment that is specific to growing grass seed in Oregon. Now, if you go to Central Oregon, it's around Salem or so, Highway 20. You can take Highway 20 east of Salem, about 20 miles to 40 miles, and you'll get into grass seed growing areas where they're growing lots of ryegrass seed and fescues, etc. And the great thing about this environment is there's no cows, so there's no fences to keep them in. So it's a totally fenceless landscape that's about 20 to 30 miles long and 40, 50 miles wide. And in this area, as you can see here with Eric, he's stooping down here, but literally in this field was probably more than 1 million Psilocybe strictipes. And you can't see them until you get closer. And then you get closer and you can see there's like 20 or 30 of them right there in a square foot. And the entire field is like that. Psilocybe strictipes is not as easy to identify because it does not bruise bluish, but it has a purple-brown spore print, and as you'll see, it has a separable gelatinous pellicle. So I'm going to give you several taxonomic key features that if you memorize or you look at my book, you'll be able to identify these mushrooms to the exclusion of poisonous species. So this is another example of Psilocybe strictipes. Very similar to Psilocybe lanceta, but lacks an acute umbo. It tends to be bluntly umbonate. And here's another example of it. Also hygrophonous at the top of the cap. And this is the separable gelatinous pellicle that is typical of many of the temperate species in the genus Psilocybe that grow in grasslands or grow in woodlands. And this separable skin here, you can, very few other mushrooms have it. And as you break apart the cap, this translucent skin, you can peer through it. And this is characteristic of a huge number of species in the genus Psilocybe. So, Psilocybe mushrooms have purple-brown spore prints. Many, but not all, have separable gelatinous pellicles. And all of them that are easy to identify that contain high amounts of psilocin bruise bluish. So if you know that a mushroom has a purple-brown spore print and a bruised bluish, those two conditions met, it is absolutely a psilocybin active mushroom. There are no exceptions to that rule. There's one or two doubtful species, but they're not toxic. But there's no poisonous species. So here's what microscopically this separable gelatinous pellicle looks like. It's translucent skin on top of the cap. This is a photomicrograph, and that layer peels off quite readily. And at the Evergreen State College, these people have not lost contact lenses. And the Evergreen State College, I like to call it the Psilocybin State College, because of all the work that has been done there under the tutelage of Dr. Michael Bugh, who published some of the best chemistry papers on the proper analysis of detecting psilocybin and psilocin from these mushrooms. Prior to that point, a whole big soup of tryptamines were being isolated, and there's lots of false positives, and people were being busted for mushrooms that weren't truly psilocybin active. So Michael Bugh and Jonathan Ott, a number of other individuals there who were in the chemistry department, produced some excellent research papers that were used, unfortunately, by the DEA, but they were accurate research papers that pinpointed the occurrence of psilocybin and psilocin, whereas before the methods were crude and inaccurate. So there's an example of a mushroom that grows. This is a habitat for Psilocybin stunsii, which grows on wood, or else on grassy areas that have been put on top of wood. So this woodland mushroom is poking up through the lawns. Because lawns are heavily watered, and that's a great thing about landscaping, is because of this need to have green grass, which is really weird. Lots of people of the world don't do what we do here, but yards are a big thing in America. And because of the abundance of watering, is a perfect microclimate for having a lot of these mushrooms come up. So this is Psilocybin stunsii. There's two varieties of it. It's got a partial veil at that extends from the cap margin to the stem. Better examples of it are here. It is not a strong, potent species, however, it grows prolifically. And this mushroom was one of at the time, Jonathan Ott and Dr. Guzman found, Dr. Daniel Stamets in the 1960s from the University of Washington sent specimens to Guzman, who was working on psilocybe, saying, what is the species? Guzman could not identify it. He needed more collections. Jonathan Ott and myself and a few other people provided more collections of it to Dr. Guzman, and then Dr. Guzman named it after Dr. Daniel Stamets, calling it Psilocybin stunsii. Now, in the field of mycology, there is no greater honor. It is like the Nobel Prize in mycology. There's no greater honor than to bequeath and to name a species after an individual. In the field of mycology, there's no greater faux pas than to try to name a species after yourself. In total contrast to medicine. If you find a new unique disease, then is a great pat on your back and a feather in your cap to name a disease after yourself if you are a physician. But in the field of mycology, that's an extreme faux pas. So it was a great honor to name the species after Dr. Daniel Stamets. My older brother, he was, didn't know psilocybes. I was doing work at the Evergreen State College. He called me up and said, Paul, I think I found some. And I go, what, John, what'd you find? He says, I found some psilocybes. I go, John, listen, it's hard to identify a mushroom over the phone, but let me try. Let's talk about the characteristics. Does it have a separable gelatinous pellicle? Yes, it does. Where's it growing? It's growing in wood chips. I go, does it bruise bluish? He goes, yes. I go, what's the spore color? It's purple-brown. I go, wow, John, it sounds like you may have found it. And John was not, a good taxonomist, but he knew enough about the language that we could accurately communicate. And I go, well, how many did you find? He goes, you won't believe it. I go, okay, I'm driving up. So I drive up from Olympia to Seattle, and my brother John said, he has some specimens there. And I go, yep, this is this new species. It has not been named yet. It's going to be called Psilocybin stunsii. We do need some more collections. I need about 20 specimens to send down to Mexico. And John kind of laughed. He goes, well, no problem about that. He says, do you want to see the patch? And I said, great. And then he goes, well, we better get some grocery sacks. So he got about 20 grocery bags. And at the University of Washington, you go down University Avenue, you go down the University, at the base of the avenue is Boat Street. And at the corner of University Avenue and Boat Street, there is a police substation. And this is beautiful, I love this. And directly across from this police substation is one of those little power substations, with the little green boxes, and the beauty bar all around them. And we parked we parked the car, and I'm going, John, this is more of cement around here than there is, wood chips. So where's the patch? And he goes, it's right there, Paul. And I go, where? And he's right there. And I look over, and I didn't see the patch because there was an eruption of mushrooms so massive that it picked up, garbage, leaves, sticks. An entire new plateau was elevated 4 to 6 inches off the ground. And the mushrooms were so solid they were touching each other. Okay, we jumped out of the car and we started picking these mushrooms. And we got 2 or 3 grocery bags full, and then pretty soon some University of Washington students come by and they go, what are you doing? Nothing. They go, yeah, sure, let me join in nothing, And they start picking, and after we got about 10 grocery bags full of this, and pretty soon there's 20, 30 people there just massively picking as quickly as possible because they're right underneath the view window from the police station, So we want to do this fast and get out of there. So we we collected a lot of these mushrooms, and then we began drying them. And because of time limitations, I don't have time to go through the experience that I had that night. But please read the introduction of my book. It was kind of brave and fun to write that introduction, but it'll tell you the end of the story from the great Boat Street patch of Psilocybin stuntzii. Now, a mushroom that grows coincidentally in the same habitat is the most deadly poisonous mushroom in the Northwest. We also have it here in Colorado. It typically grows in wood chips, same habitat, or directly on logs. It's called Galerina autumnalis, the autumnal galerina. There's also Galerina venenata. They're deadly poisonous. If you were colorblind, and you would have a big problem distinguishing Psilocybin stuntzii from this species here. The galerinas have rusty brown spore prints. Some of them are bluish black at the base, and not because of psilocybin or psilocin. So be forewarned. And the same habitat that you're collecting these magic mushrooms are the most deadly poisonous species in the Northwest. And the most deadly poisonous species in the Northwest tend to be small ones, not the giant, large amanitas. We have a few reports of Amanita phalloides, but that's totally eclipsed by a millionfold of how prevalent these galerinas are. They're extremely common, and I look at these as indicator species. That if I find these deadly poisonous galerinas, aha, the habitat is correct for psilocybes. So I'm always thankful that I see them, because I know that the environment is correct for finding these psilocybes as well. This is what I call the ring of death of the late Dr. Stephen Pollock, and there's enough galerinas here to probably kill 20 people. Unfortunately, several deaths have occurred, and Andy and myself and Manny were very strong in our belief that we should educate the public, so if they are going to look for these magic mushrooms, they don't kill themselves by misidentification. There's a group of mycologists and physicians who believe that these long hairs who are looking for these magic mushrooms, if they mistakenly identified them and ate a deadly poisonous mushrooms and died, so be it. They believe that the world's probably better off without these people on the planet. And it was shocking to hear physicians actually present this point of view. I mean, it was totally irresponsible. And indeed, several people have died because they have delayed going to the hospital environment, because some of the physicians at the hospitals would contact law enforcement officials, and then while they're in the hospital, these kids would get busted, or these young people get busted, because they would have voucher specimens they'd bring into the hospital for the physician to identify. And once they realized it was probably psilocybin mushroom, they contacted law enforcement people, and so these people get busted as they're going through this a bad trip. As a result, several people have died now because they delayed going to the hospital, and they thought they'd just ride out the experience, and they ended up dying because of the alpha amanitins and the cyclopeptides in these mushrooms. This is a photograph that I love to show, because it shows you how close the deadly poison species and a psychoactive species can grow. This on the right is Galerina autumnalis, on the left is Psilocybin stuntzii, growing so close together naturally in wood chips that they're touching. Now, all of us know many too many eager beavers that will go into a patch like this and collect all the mushrooms. And those are people who are not being killed by these mushrooms may later in life, see tremendous, liver damage, etc. And so even though you get a sub-death dose, I think it can drastically negatively impact your health. Another one is very, very common is Psilocybin filaris. Now, be also forewarned, for those of you who grow psilocybes outdoors in wood chips, it is normal and natural and to be expected that you will get Galerina autumnalis and Psilocybin filaris, which is deadly poisonous as well, growing in your psilocybe patches. They grow in the same habitat, and there's probably a species sequence phenomenon going on here. They tend to go parallel with other, which I think is uniquely beautiful about nature, to have heaven and hell, to have death and life, as a complementary yin yang in nature. I think is poetically beautiful, because the people who are knowledgeable, the people who are careful, the people who are attentive and are good observationalists can tell the difference. So Psilocybin filaris can grow in the grasslands as well. No reported deaths to my knowledge from this mushroom, but we do know contains the cyclopeptides that are also present in the deadly amanitas. Another species that I published, Psilocybe fibrillosa. One of the easiest places to find psilocybe mushrooms is in October, November at rhododendron gardens in the Northwest. If you're traveling to the Northwest and you want to find a psilocybe, look up the local rhododendron garden in the paper. Very few visitors there at that time of year, but they tend to mulch a lot, and the rhododendrons like shade, high humidity. They tend to be incorporated into a multi-canopy environment with mixed woods. All those are ingredients for a good psilocybe fruiting. Rarely have I ever not found a psilocybe in a rhododendron patch in October and November. So if you don't want to go to your local courthouse or police station, you want to go someplace a little bit more discreet to find these mushrooms, I recommend a rhododendron garden. Psilocybe cyanofabulosa here more expanded. I'm going to zoom through these. And again, Psilocybe cyanofabulosa, they're growing directly beneath the rhododendron. And so there's a close affiliation of the two of those together. Okay, what's... Yes?
It doesn't take me an hour to tell everything I know about photography, so you can go over.
Oh, I can? Thank you so much. Because, George, is that stuck? Okay, do you know how to unstuck it? You have to use that lever and turn the slide carousel upside down and spin it. Be careful because you can drop all the slides out of it. Is this... so there are about 198 species in the genus Psilocybe. We know now that 95 to 97 of which are psilocybin active. So almost half the species, or half the taxa presently published in the world, contain psilocybin and psilocin, which is the largest proportionality of any species in any genus containing those substances. George, I can fix that in a New York second if you want me to jump down. Just crash the thing and pull it up. You know how that lever in the center? You know that release lever? You got it? All right. Be careful when you spin that so you don't... Yeah. What's that? Potency-wise, the question was, what's the relationship between Semilanceata, strictipes, and pelliculosa and potency? Semilanceata has about 1% psilocybin in it. Pelliculosa has about 0.25. So there's 4 times as active. Strictipes has never been analyzed, but from the reports that we've received, it's probably half as active.
Why do they grow in rings?
Lots of mushrooms grow in rings, probably because a colony started from the center, from one point, and then grew out. And so they often produce a circular ring. How you doing, George? You see, I'm going to go back a few.
Now, one was jammed, I had to pick out.
Okay. All right. Well, what happened to Baeocystis? Okay, that's all right. That's fine. This is another species that's collected at hot springs in British Columbia. Another example of an environment that's going through catastrophic continuous change. And these things, these psilocybe mushrooms tend to be localized in those environments. We have not identified the species, but it's common to a hot springs that's well visited in British Columbia. It's a photograph by Paul Kruger. So this clearly shows the bluing reaction in the genus Psilocybe. On the left is Psilocybe Baeocystis. We have focus. And on the right is Cyanofabulosa. 2 different species showing classically the same reaction. The mushrooms bruise bluish. Typically they bruise bluish in the matter of the more potent ones in the matter of 5 minutes, but it can be 4 or 5 hours before the bluing reaction shows up. If you choose to partake of these mushrooms, I forewarn you right now, they are not something to be toyed with. I'm very concerned about the recreational use of these mushrooms. And the one thing that's good about these mushrooms is that they're non-addictive, and they are self-limiting to some degree, because those people who start to ingest them with frequency all know that after a while there's this gut reaction that you don't want to take them again for a while. Paralleled and in contrast with the reaction that every time you take them, you think to yourself, I should be eating these a lot more often. So I don't know how you rectify those 2 points of view, but whenever I take these mushrooms, I'm going, I should be eating these all the time. Then after I eat them frequently, then I think, oh, there's this body reaction of repulsion. Obviously these mushrooms, as with any potent psychoactive plant, you shouldn't drive, operate, nuclear power facilities, fly airplanes, There is a great movie from England called Work as a 4-Letter Word. I don't know if anybody has seen this. This guy is working in a steam plant that's powered by nuclear energy, and he buys a mushroom kit from a mushroom mail order business, and he can't get it to work, so he takes it to the steam plant, and pretty soon the entire nuclear facility is taken over by magic mushrooms, Psilocybe cubensis, and he has a great time you know, with the SWAT teams coming in to raiding the facility, they have to walk past the beds of the mushrooms, and the mushrooms are saying, eat me, eat me. And very soon all the SWAT teams are converted, and then they have great fun shutting down London, you know. It's a great movie, you know, it's really fun. Work is a 4-letter word, you know. But anyhow, Psilocybin baeocystis is a very difficult mushroom to find. It hides itself. It's like morels. It's very, very difficult. It has a bruising reaction on the stem as well. Pretty potent. A lot of misinformation on baeocystis. There's a compound isolated called baeocystin, which is also another tryptamine, you know, indole derivative, and it is associated with a death in Kelso, Washington, of a 5-year-old kid. It was then used by alarmist mycologists as saying, "Watch out, these mushrooms could be deadly poisonous." I knew Alexander Smith, you know, quite well before he died. Oh, obviously, I wouldn't know him well after he died. Well, maybe I could. Wait a second. But the collection that was published was not baeocystis, it was cyanescens, and the compound should have been called cyanesin, but it was called baeocystin because of a misidentification. And then talking to Alexander Smith, he conceded to me that there were gallerinas also growing in that yard subsequently that when he visited it, and that this whole thing was a misnomer. I described that also in detail in Psilocybin Mushrooms of the World. So for those of you who've heard about this baeocystin being toxic, there's no evidence of it whatsoever. Another example is Psilocybin baeocystis. And I will zoom forward. And one of my favorite of all mushrooms to witness is Psilocybin cyanescens, which has this wonderful undulating cap and tends to be cespitose, which means it grows in clusters. It too, and as well as baeocystis, as well as Cyanofibulosa, as well as Strictipes and Semilanceata, all have separable gelatinous pellicles, skins. But after the cap dries off, the skin is no longer separable. You have to rehydrate it. Bruising bluish strongly, have strong purple round spores in color. Psilocybin cyanescens is quickly acclimates to garden and yard environments. The biggest sellers of Psilocybin cyanescens spawn are the soil makers in Washington and Oregon. They have these huge piles of Douglas fir chips, and then they sell them off as beauty bark. And so several times we've been able to trace where these mushrooms have come from because we asked the people where they got their beauty bark, and they got it from a reseller who bought it from a soil company. So we go back to the soil company, and sure enough, around the big piles of sawdust and chips are these psilocybins. Now, law enforcement officials have tried to eliminate psilocybins from the environment by using fungicides. Of course, it's, you know, very toxic and not popular, but give it up. There's no way of waging a drug war against psilocybins and winning. Every attempt by law enforcement is futile, because in the course of trying to control mushrooms, they end up spreading them. And so they end up becoming agents and employees of the mushrooms. So it's a beautiful contradiction that it defies, you know, the edicts of law enforcement. You can't suppress these mushrooms because it'd be like suppressing nature. You can't, you know, suppress nature. So, and this is one oh, okay, this is one of my Psilocybin patches. There I said it, okay. A long time ago. Okay, now, if you thought Carrie Mullis was interesting, those of you here last year saw Christian Wretch. And Christian, wow, you know, Christian is one of these intellectual giants of our time. Andy and I both, you know, introduced Christian as being our good friend. He came up and gave an incredible lecture that we had us cowering in the chairs. He's an anarchist and he's an atheist. But Christian has written 14 books now. The guy is incredibly smart, speaks several languages fluently, and I took Christian down to the type locality of a new species that I published with Johann Gartz called Psilocybin azurescens. It's duly named for my son Azurus, who's in the audience, and it's also named because of blue fibrils on the stem that before you even touch the mushrooms, this mushroom is so potent that the blue fibrils in contact with the air, the fibrils become bluish in contact with the air and temperature fluctuation. It is literally at the junction of the Columbia River flowing into the Pacific Ocean, which is a catastrophic environment going through all sorts of change. It's windswept. The Army Corps of Engineers planted this grass here called Ammophila maritima, as a dune grass to control erosion. And at the cusp of where the Columbia River flows into the Pacific Ocean near Astoria, Oregon, is the Fort Stevens State Park, which is a 40,000 acre, state park where you can rent yurts, you can camp, and even though I put this, there were busloads of people going up to this park several years ago, and my confidants who were kind of like my informants, and that is they told me first about this location. I asked them, listen, this is your patch. You mind if I put it in the book? And at this point, they said, listen, there's several thousand people coming here now. What does it matter? So I put it in the book, and last year, an enormous fruitings of Psilocybin azurescens related to the huge ice storm that we had 2 years ago coming up out of the Columbia Basin and hit Oregon and Washington and knocked down literally tens of millions of trees, snapped the trees off. And that huge debris layer of broken limbs fueled a psilocybe fruiting heretofore never seen by the people who are experiencing this area. So this is a great place to go. You can go in October, November. The fruitings last until January because the buffering effect of the Columbia River prevents freezing. It's a really interesting place to go. Be careful because law enforcement at Astoria, Oregon, I swear half their budget now comes from busting people, at this location. So, and the mushrooms tend to get quite large. I don't recommend putting them into a Ziploc, by the way, but this is all that we had at the time. One mushroom is probably good for 3-4 people when it's fresh. It's very, very potent. This is one of the largest specimens that was collected, and I'll show more of it. And there it is, too. It also has a hygrophonous cap. It's got rhizomorphs at the base of the stem. So those of you who saw my first talk on cultivation can draw your own conclusions. And it is similar to cyanescens, except it does not have an undulating margin. The margin is even, and then as it tries to expand, sometimes it splits, but it has a distinct broad umbo, a low nipple, a blunt nipple at the center of the cap. And that feature is unique to the species. And here it shows it. We also call these flying saucer mushrooms. We also call them fantazitakis, like matsutake, shiitake, nokitake, fantazitakis. So I had a great time with a Japanese mycologist who called me from Japan, asking me about psilocybes. I go, oh, you mean fantazitakis? So, and he picked up on it right away. And so I'm sure in Japan now this name is probably commonly used. So this is a very, very beautiful mushroom. And, I will come off on record right now saying that if you're growing psilocybin mushrooms commercially, you're making, number one, a lot of money. You're risking your future. And if you get busted, you have to pay the price because you chose to make the money. If you are growing psilocybin mushrooms for your own personal consumption in your backyard, most of us only eat these mushrooms once, twice, 3 times a year. It's no big deal. And you don't need hardly any mushrooms at all. So those of you who are growing these mushrooms commercially, I caution you right now. There's other ways of making money in this world that are safer, better for your family, better for keeping your land, etc., than growing psilocybin mushrooms commercially. Especially when you know what I know now, and just finding these psilocybes in natural habitat, I never need to have them. I can just go out into the woods or in the fields and pick them anytime I want to. So, there are several people who have gotten in trouble in the past few years, and I'm sympathetic on one level. At the same time, I realize they probably made a few $100,000, and I didn't, and they did, and they got busted. They should pay their attorney, and pay the price. So fortunately in Washington and Oregon, because mushrooms are such part of the natural environment, the legal system is very forgiving, even on the cultivation of Psilocybe cubensis commercially. I know several individuals, and they were threatened with everything, but it came down to it, as probation, a few $1,000 fine. One person spent 8 weeks in jail and had 400 dried pounds of cubensis. So it's, mushrooms are looked upon as being different than LSD, different than, cocaine or anything like that by the legal system in some parts of the country. In Iowa and elsewhere, mushrooms are looked upon as drug manufacture, and they read the law as code. In Washington State, and probably in Colorado for that, in some regions of Colorado where there's a lot of mushroom activity, it's just another mushroom. So, okay, and another shot of Psilocybe azurescens. And yet more of it. It just shows you how large it can be. Now, and more azurescens. And they have so much psilocybin psilocin that the insect bites turn the mushrooms purple black. And as you can see here, there's a very, very beautiful mushroom to grow. And now it grows in Vermont. It grows all over Europe. It grows all over, North America. It's been reported as far south as Big Sur, for people cultivating it. Again, the spores of these are legal, and there are companies selling spores. Even a person here at this conference who's brave enough to sell spores. And my hat is off to you. I personally wouldn't do it, but I can understand that there is a need out there for people wanting to gain access to these things. But come to the Northwest. You'll come to Astoria, Oregon. You can find these mushrooms. They're everywhere. And this shows you the bluing reaction here is so intense it becomes indigo black because it's so packed full in psilocin. This is the most potent psilocybin active mushroom in the world, as you'll see here in a few minutes. Another mushroom which is bluish and can have a bluing reaction, which is purple-brown spores, is Psilocybe aeruginosa. And this Psilocybe aeruginosa is a mushroom that has intermittent reports of being active and not active. And it may be that this blue pigment, which we know now is not a directly linearly derived degradation compound from psilocin, but appears to be a parallel pathway where as the psilocin is being broken down, that this blue pigment is also being formed with a parallel degradation pathway. It's not directly in the same line, but it's a good indicator. This could be the bridge species that explains how that process works. And maybe Kerry, if he's in the audience, he'd be a good person to figure out this pathway. No one's figured it out to date. It's a total mystery after all this time. Psilocybe folliculosa is another. This is one that looks very much like what we call telluridensis. This is what I'm hoping that sometime we can find some more specimens of. Very, very common along pathways in the Northwest, along trails. This is a trail mushroom. It loves trails, and it loves roads that have been reclaimed by nature, where alder trees are growing up. So in the Northwest, if you don't drive down a road in the woods for a year, there'll be alder saplings everywhere, and then 4 or 5 years later, these mushrooms will come up when the alder saplings are about 12, 15 feet high. Then Psilocybe folliculosa can grow side by side with a deadly poisonous mushroom, Gallerana adamnalis. It just shows that they share the same habitat. Psilocybe sylvatica is a sister species to Psilocybe folliculosa. It's also resident in the same environments. And this is a photograph, I'm not sure who provided it to me, of the only specimen of a psilocybin active species that we have found growing in woodlands here in Colorado. And this lone specimen is very folliculosa-like, as you saw in the previous images. And in culture, it produces these circadian rings that are strongly bluing. Guzman has these cultures. These are his cultures, and he was sent the partial specimen. And in the course of his analysis, he determined it was a new species because it has pleurocystidia, which are very unique. But no more voucher specimens, we can't publish it. So again, if somebody collects it, I'll give you Dr. Gaston Guzman's address, so you can send it directly to him. And if we get at least 2 specimens, then we have a new taxon, a new species. Okay, now this is my most recent species, and this is the interface environment that these psilocybes love. And this is classic, is a grassland going into a woodlands. And that margin environment, the interface environment, tends to be the most productive area for finding these psilocybes. And this is from northern Georgia in Cherokee County. And this person contacted me over internet, and I rarely ever answer any questions on psilocybes, but I was curious because northern Georgia, there's no reports. There's a Psilocybe cerulescens that was found by Montgomery, Alabama in 1914, but there's no other reports besides Psilocybe cubensis and another one, Psilocybe mammillata from Georgia. So this person contacted me, and I sent her a series of questions, fully expecting the person didn't really have anything of interest, and it turned out that she did. And this is this new species named in honor of Andy, Psilocybe wileyi, which I just like the name, the way it sounds, wild eye, wily eye. What do you say, I think it fits. It fits perfectly. Yes, it's very strong. You'll see an analysis of it coming up here in just a minute. And it has this dark region at the center of the cap, which is real distinctive of it. Now, this is growing in the back of a person's yard that's in a development in Georgia right adjacent to a woods. I just got a photograph from a person in Kentucky, and it looks like, we're not sure, and we don't know for a few more weeks, but it looks like Wiley eye is now reported from Kentucky. So this mushroom, I mean, it's like anything else. So somebody gave me a report. They couldn't find any mushrooms on Friday, and so they nibbled a little bit of a psilocybe. They waited 20 minutes, and they found mushrooms everywhere. And it may be that once you learn to recognize things in the background environment, that this mushroom will become a lot more frequently encountered, because people didn't know what to look for. It's got purple-brown spores, bruises bluish, you know, and does not have a separable gelatinous pellicle. But when it's young here, it's very similar to some species, a species called cerulescens in Mexico. Okay, and it has white margins on the gills, which are very characteristic of many species in the genus Psilocybin. I won't go into those microscopic features. Other people are aware of some of my work microscopically with Psilocybes. So this is fantastic, you know, that we can, I don't know how to adequately express this, but to give Andy recognition that he's been long overdue, because he put his neck out, and as well as Manny, but they put their necks out with in the community, in their community of physicians, and decided to start these conferences because of the misinformation and outright lies that were being propagated on the public by the physician community. And they did so at personal risk and under great personal criticism. So I'm really honored that I was in a position of giving Andy the recognition he so much deserved. Because in 1975, in the Harvard Botanical Leaflets, he published one of the first reports on the use of mushrooms outside of Eugene, Oregon. And that really stirred up a lot of interest, because it was one of the first reports of psilocybes growing in that area being used. We knew that they were in the area, but we had very little knowledge. And through his contacts, then it just emanated out from these people who knew these mushrooms that informed other people, et cetera, et cetera. And the last shot of psilocybe Wiley eye. Okay, I'm going to switch to one more carousel. It's 15 minutes after. I started 10 minutes after. Can I have 10 more minutes? Okay. All right. Now we're going to jump into different regions of the world. I'm just going to show you that these mushrooms are present in a wide number of habitats. Okay, this is the northeastern North America, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Vermont, up into Quebec. And this is Psilocybe cerulipes. Grows along the Appalachian Trail, for those of you who hike the Appalachian Trail in September. And it has fibrils on the cap margin, separable gelatinous pellicle, purple-brown spore print, bruises bluish. Also is hygrophilous. It's chestnut brown when it's wet, translucent striped margin, little lines on the margin. When it dries, it becomes opaque. You know, classic psilocybe. This is Psilocybe quebecensis, growing in the Jacques-Cartier River Valley of Quebec. It is reported to be one of the most common species there, growing on hardwoods. I think it's growing on beach. This is Psilocybe bohemica, growing in Central Europe. Same classic features: separable gelatinous pellicle, purple-brown spore print, bruises bluish. This is that was Psilocybe bohemica. This is Psilocybe cerbica. Now the photographs I'm showing you, for those of you who are not aware of it, this photograph of Psilocybe cerbica came from Dr. Horik Mosier, who published the species Psilocybe cerbica. This is a photograph of the type collection of Psilocybe cerbica. I think because of my big book, Growing Gourmet Medicinal Mushrooms, got me a lot of respectability in the field, and I was able to contact the authors and the discoverers of these new species. And they were so kind to send me photographs of the type collections, which are throughout my latest book. So that's a real coup d'etat in the field of mycology, to have photographs of type collections upon which the species is based. Okay, this is Psilocybe subaruginosa. This is from Australia, in Tasmania. Here's another photograph of Psilocybe subaruginosa. It's a very large complex of psilocybes, similar to cyanethins, much longer stem. And another photograph by David Aurora of Psilocybe subaruginosa. Now there's another species called subaruginescens that I'll talk about in a minute. That's a different species. This is a Psilocybe australiana, and Australia is resplendent with these psilocybes. I suspect that Chile has a lot of species that have not been published. Now we'll move over to Japan. This is Psilocybe argentipes. This is Psilocybe venenata, a misnomer because no one's ever died from this mushroom, but the mycologists at that time were not experienced with its effects, and knew of people who had eaten large amounts of this mushrooms and were totally unexpected the effects. And so they named it Psilocybe venenata, similar to the Pelliculosa and Telluridensis, but it's much stronger bluing reaction. This is probably what Telluridensis really looks like, you know, in a number of specimens. And then this is a photograph by Gary Linkoff. This is subaruginescens from Thailand. This is Psilocybe subcerilipes. This is from northern Japan and Hokkaido. And then Psilocybe cubensis, otherwise known as Stropharia cubensis. This Psilocybe cubensis on elephant dung. There's a big discussion about where was the natural habitat, the natural niche that this mushroom evolved. It probably evolved from elephant dung and giraffe, etc., and became associated with cattle. And another photograph of Psilocybe cubensis from Mexico. Psilocybe cubensis goes out through southeastern Asia, grows in South America, Central America, in Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, subtropical species. It can easily be grown. It's the mushroom that most of the people who are growing psilocybes choose to cultivate indoors. It's a majestic and beautiful mushroom with an exquisitely formed partial veil that falls. And any of you who've witnessed this, I highly recommend that if you see the mushroom at this young form, sit with it and watch it develop in front of your very eyes. In a matter of an hour, you can watch this partial veil totally drop in slow motion. And it's a really beautiful and extraordinary experience. And I recommend that many of you, before you ingest these mushrooms, that you sit with the mushrooms, you try to connect with them. I believe that mushrooms choose individuals. We don't choose them. Or more accurately, when the mushrooms choose us, we have good experiences. When we choose the mushrooms, sometimes the experiences can be good, maybe bad. But I think there's a pairing there that demands great respect on both parties. And a photograph by Kit Skates of Psilocybe cubensis in jar cultivation was the method that Austin Eric or Terence McKenna and Dennis McKenna popularized through their books. Photograph by Satit Taitakun of growing Psilocybe cubensis in Thailand on rice hulls. Psilocybe cubensis can be grown on a wide variety of substrates. And I took this photograph at the Maya Bells campground in Palenque because this is kind of typical. There is a conference that we do every year in Mexico that Jonathan Ott, Terence McKenna, Rob Montgomery, and Ken Symington organize, and Sasha Shulgin, myself, and a number, Giorgio Sammarini, Christian Retch, a number of people attend. You can go to our homepage at fungi.com, and we have a description of that conference. It's a lot of fun, and I highly recommend it, and it's right at the Mayan ruins in Palenque. And then Psilocybe hugasheni. This is a mushroom that grows in central and southern Mexico, a photograph by Jim Jacobs. Very, very unusually looking psilocybes. Psilocybe azotiocorum, used obviously by the Aztec peoples, and is one of their preferred sacraments. Psilocybe hugasheni grows in coffee plantations in the highlands of Guatemala and Mexico, southern Mexico. Very, very pretty golden yellow mushroom. It strongly bruises bluish. It's an interesting combination of colors. Psilocybe zapaticorum, which I love that name, zapaticorum. A photograph of Jim Jacobs as well, and this looks like an elf's cap. It's very, very common. Okay, I'm going to just finish up with these few photographs. This is a comparison of the maximum psilocybin and psilocin concentrations in baeocystin in about 12 different species of psilocybe. My pointer does not work very well here, but there it goes. There's Psilocybe azurescens, which is just way above. The closest species would be Baeocystis, then Psilocybe bohemica, then Semilanciata, then cubensis, then I can't see it, and I can't see it, and I can't see it. And it goes on from there. These charts are also in the book. More interestingly, you look at the levels of psilocybin and psilocin and baeocystin, and you'll see that Psilocybe azurescens here is just extraordinary. Combined psilocybin and psilocin and baeocystin is like 2.5% of its dry mass are these crystallized tryptamines. So that's a phenomenal amount of this compound. And it begs the question, why are these mushrooms producing this compound? Clearly, these mushrooms are becoming more prevalent because of human interest and human intervention. So I think that is a valid argument. These mushrooms are coming into being by our participation with them. And insects are attracted to oyster mushrooms, spores, and beetles dig into Pictoporus betulinus. Why wouldn't humans also be enlisted as an agent for spreading the progeny of psilocybes? The parallels are already there. And I think it's part of our continuing symbiosis, but humans have a peculiar attitude of thinking that because they're so complex, that they can't be involved in these subtle interrelationships. And I think that's a really egocentric and false point of view. I think we're involved actively in spreading spore mass of these things, consciously by these mushrooms. Okay, I have a whole bunch of other slides, but I'm not going to get through them. This just came in the mail to me 2 days ago, and this is by Machiel Norderloos, which is a Norwegian mycologist who published this in Mycoflora. And I show this because I'm very greatly honored, and I feel so thankful. He published a short monograph on Pholiota, Psilocybe, and Penilus. And in this monograph, where he reevaluates the original type collections, and he's restudied about 25 different species of psilocybin active mushrooms, in this little monograph that he's produced, he chooses my photographs in psilocybin mushrooms of the world and my descriptions as being descriptions and photographs accurately reflecting the type collections. So Gary and Manny, you all know the significance of having your photograph chosen and selected as a typical representation of the species. So this is good news for me academically, because it means that my taxa now that I've named, including Psilocybe wiley, azurescens, Cynofibulosa, Liniformis variety americana, will now, it's got validation from other mycologists around the world, which means that the work that I and we have been doing has been validated. So I've run out of time. I'd love to talk a lot more, but thank you very much.
I want to take a minute to acknowledge the contribution of so many people to this event. Gary Linkhoff, John Corbin, Carrie Mullis, Rita Rosenberg, Mushroom Strudel, Paul Stamets, Andy Weil, Bill and Karen Adams, Jane and Eleanor Adams, Lee and Linnea Gilman, Art Goodtimes, Paul Kleit, Jason Salzman, Joanne Salzman, and John Sergesi, and many, many others. I wish I could remember the man that Art Goodtimes brought to bake the mushroom bread. It was just outstanding. And there are so many others who've added to this event that has so many aspects, and we all appreciate every contribution. I also want to remind you of Tom Thacker, who was indicted for mushroom possession, psilocybin mushroom possession, in Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas is not Olympia, Washington. And Tom is faced with the possibility of 5 years to life in prison for possessing psilocybin mushrooms. There's a box on the counter in the lobby where you might make a contribution or pick up the information that would enable you to write a letter in his support. Anyone need a ride from Telluride? Any rides needed? If not, we'll continue in 5 minutes with Linnea Gilman on photography.